Chapter 2: Origins of the Ukrainian Party of Socialist Revolutionaries UPSR, predecessor of Borot'bism. A. Ideological background of the UPSR. Although Ukraine in the early 20th century was primarily an agricultural country, and although the peasants formed the solid core even of some Ukrainian Marxist parties, there was no separate Ukrainian peasant party in Ukraine before 1917, such as the Party of Socialist Revolutionaries (SRs) in Russia. The revolutionary movement in Ukraine, as in Russia, developed under the double influence of populism and Marxism. The generation of the 1840s through the 1870s, from the Brotherhood of Saints Cyril and Methodius to Drahomanov, had been guided by populist ideals and aims. Following the period of reaction in the 1880s, a new generation reared on Marxism came to the force in the last decade of the 19th century. From this time on, down to the revolution of 1917, Marxist and social democratic ideas played the leading roles in the political life of socialist circles in Ukraine. However, after 1905, populist ideas enjoyed a revival, which was to contribute to the formation in 1917 of a strong party for the peasants, the UPSR, side by side with the USDRP. The UPSR did not possess a uniform and clear-cut ideology, for it was influenced by many sources. Zhivotko offers the following explanation for this fact. At a time when socialist thought in the West was based primarily on the materialist conception of social growth, and in particular on Marxist philosophy of history, in the East it developed along two paths. One is a materialist monistic outlook, which provided the foundation for social democracy, and two is a pluralist view of social development, expounded by populism, which after an idealist and critical stage soon provided the stimulus for the creation of the Party of Socialist Revolutionaries All-Russian, which held its first congress in 1897 in Voronezh. The same ideology inspired the Armenian Party, Deshnak Tsutyun Unity, the Georgian Party of Socialist Federalists, and the Ukrainian Party of Socialist Revolutionaries. The influence of populism in Ukraine, although significant, was weaker than in Russia. There were at least two reasons for this. In the first place, the Russian populists leaned heavily on certain theories concerning Russia's destiny which had been developed by Slavophiles. But toward the end of the 19th century, Slavophilism became tinged with Russian national pan-Slavism, a development which greatly limited its appeal to Ukrainians. Secondly, Russian populism accepted from the Slavophiles their theory of the significance in Russia's development of the peasant repartitional commune, Mir, as the germ of the future structure of Russian society. Ukraine, however, lacked the Mir, which had become the cornerstone of the philosophy of the Russian populists and their intellectual descendants, the SRs. Therefore, although brought up on Russian populist ideas, the Ukrainian SR groups at the beginning of the 20th century made important revisions in these ideas to fit their own needs, revisions based on the teachings of Drahomanov, on the publications of the immigrant Mykola Zalizhnyak, who translated much Western European socialist literature into Ukrainian, and on the Ukrainian revolutionary press, which was influenced more by liberal and social democratic than by populist ideas. Of the UPSR in 1917, Shapoval has stated that it grew spontaneously and comprised a wide range of intellects, temperaments, tastes, and habits. To expect that all should merge into one specific type within the period of a year was impossible. Therefore, although all had a single aim, the roads were many. Thus, the UPSR, when it was formed in 1917, had the character of a non-Marxist peasant party. It was not, however, anti-Marxist, as were the Russian SRs who for years had waged ideological battle against the Russian Marxists. B. The first attempts at formation of Ukrainian SR groups before 1917. The first mention of a Ukrainian SR group occurs in connection with the split in the RUP, brought about by that party's evolution towards social democracy. Mikita Shapoval, the most prominent leader of the UPSR, had stated that he knew of an attempt to create an organization of socialist revolutionaries as early as 1903. In his autobiography, he writes that in 1903, we followed the Russian socialist revolutionary program. In order to check on the basic premises of the ideology, Alexander K. Mitsyuk was sent from Prokhorovka to Kiev, where he saw the Social Democrat student Volodymyr Vinnichenko. On his return, he told us his impressions, and we decided that the SR program was the best. In the following year, Shapoval formed the Committee for the Defense of Ukraine, which organized the destruction of monuments commemorating Russian domination over Ukraine. But it was only while in prison in 1906 to 1907 that Shapoval, upon reading Lazarev's Zemlya y Volya, Land and Liberty, finally became convinced of the truth of the socialist revolutionary platform. By 1909, Shapoval was ready to fight for revolutionary populism. Arkady Zhivotko, another well-known figure in the UPSR, believes that the first signs of organized Ukrainian socialist revolutionary life were evident in 1903 to 1904, when some members of the RUP, upon leaving that party, began to form circles of Ukrainian socialist revolutionaries. On the whole, however, Ukrainian socialist revolutionaries as a separate political trend were scarcely in evidence before 1905. It was in 1906 that separate circles of Ukrainian socialist revolutionaries became evident in a more precise form. Zhivotko cites evidence from police reports to the effect that in 1907 an organizational congress was held by the Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionary Party and its program approved. He also mentions a manifesto dated August 1911, which declared that in 1906 two parties came into existence almost at the same time, the Ukrainian Party of Socialist Revolutionaries and a militant organization called Ukrainian People's Defense, Ukrainska Narodna Obrona. In 1907, UNO held its last congress, which, aside from preserving its militant function, accepted the program of the Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionaries and thus merged with them. Since that time, there has been one party of Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionaries with a Supreme Council at its head. The manifesto, signed by a Supreme Council of the UPSR, closed with these slogans: "Long live the revolution! Long live the party of Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionaries! Long live socialism! Fight for land and liberty! Liberty to all peoples! For us, for Ukraine!" Thus was Russian populism mingled with nascent Ukrainian nationalism. According to Zhivotko, the Ukrainian members of the Second State Duma, Dovhopol, Vasil Khvist and others, were connected with the UPSR and spoke in its behalf in 1907. None of the members of the UPSR Congress mentioned by Zhivotko, however, are recorded in other extant sources, nor are there any other traces of UPSR activity or of a program at this time. Furthermore, Pavlo Hristyuk, a prominent leader of the UPSR, has written that until the Great Ukrainian Revolution 1917, the Ukrainian Party of Socialist Revolutionaries had no program of its own, although separate groups existed as early as the time of the First Russian Revolution in 1905 to 1906. And finally, in his autobiography, Shapoval makes no mention of the UPSR as a party before the revolution of 1917. Thus, while it can be concluded that the UPSR did not exist as an organized all-Ukrainian party prior to 1917, it is equally evident that embryonic SR groups existed long before 1917. There seems little doubt that the manifesto mentioned by Zhivotko was issued by just a group. C. The first SR groups and party program. Shapoval mentions that in Kiev, in the period 1905 to 1907, a circle of Ukrainian SRs, including Serhiy O. Yefremov and Mykola Zalizniak, attempted to form a party. Following the failure of the 1905 revolution, Zalizniak organized an SR group abroad. An agrarian terrorist group of SRs had been led by Mitsyuk in the province of Poltava in 1903 to 1904, while a similar group was organized in 1907 by Volodymyr Shekhovsky in the province of Chernigov. Shortly before World War I, an active group of revolutionary populists, including Shapoval, Tovkachevsky, Bohatsky, and Yevshan, centered in Kiev around the journal Ukrainska Chata, Ukrainian Home, which was published from 1909 to 1914. The extent of this group's activity consisted of criticizing bourgeois populism and advancing a program of political, cultural, and economic maximalism. Similar groups of Ukrainian SRs were formed in Kharkiv, Moscow, and Petrograd during World War I. Both Zhivotko and Hristyuk make note of another Kievan group of SRs on which in 1913 began to publish the illegal journal Borot'bism, Struggle. This publication, with financial aid from Ukrainian SRs in Moscow, survived until May 1, 1915. It was edited by Mykola Kovakevsky, with the participation of A. Polonsky, S. Yefremov, Levko Kovalev, a future member of the Borot'bism Central Committee, V. Prokopovich, A. Nikovsky, Prihar, and the poet Oles. It has not been possible to establish whether there was any direct contact between this group and the group under the influence of Ukrainska Chata. The lack of evidence suggests that there were differences of opinion among the local groups, a fact which helps to explain the absence of a unified policy among the Ukrainian SRs. It was Kovalevsky who made the first major attempt to draw up a program for the UPSR. First published in Borot'bism, the program was revised and in January 1916 circulated widely as a pamphlet under the title Draft Party Program of the Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionaries, endorsed by the Kiev Group of Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionaries. The ideal form of government, according to the program, would be an alliance, Soyuz, of free national and territorial federations to be governed by a combined Spilny parliament, but in view of the current socio-political situation, the program demanded only the convening of a Ukrainian Constituent Assembly, Ustanovich Soim, which would establish the national and territorial autonomy of the Ukrainian people. Further, the program favored nationalization of the land, while in the field of international relations it declared the party to be a free member of that large socialist family, the International. Two of the members of the Borot'bism group, Kovalevsky and Kovalev, attended a Congress of Ukrainian Socialist Parties which convened illegally in Moscow in January 1915. Although Ukrainian SRs and SDs at the Congress debated the possibility of merging all existing groups into one Ukrainian Socialist Party, no agreement was reached. Following the Congress, Ukrainian SRs met amongst themselves. Besides Kovalevsky and Kovalev, those present included Mykola Shrach and Mikhailo Polos, Little Kovalev, a future member of the Borot'bism Central Committee. In connection with the Moscow meeting, Hristyuk mentions two organizations in Borispol and Novobasany in the province of Poltava, which were founded by the peasant Odinets, a future Borot'bist, in administrative exile from the province of Chernigov. In the period 1915 to 1916, smaller but no less active groups of SRs worked in the cooperatives and other Ukrainian organizations such as the Youth Union, Yunatska Spilka, and the Ukrainian Socialist Committee, in which the subsequently prominent Borot'bist Andriy Zalevichi distinguished himself. Especially active in the province of Poltava, the Youth Union included among its members from Poltava the following future Borot'bisti: Alexander Lisovik, Matena Bohayevich, Andriy Khvelya, the Demyanovsky brothers, Viktor Shuhai, Minko, Vilenberg, and Daleki. Almost all the UPSR youth in the province of Poltava were to follow the Borot'bisti.